Carnegie Hall, March 27, 1948. When the dressing room door knocked, Billie Holiday was touching up her makeup. A staff member handed her an envelope. There was no name on it, just Lady Day written across the front. When Billie opened the envelope and read the first line of the letter inside, the color drained from her face. Her hands began trembling. She struggled to breathe, and right then the stage manager knocked on the door. 5 minutes, Miss Holiday. But when Billie Holiday finished reading that letter, she was no longer the same person. 15 minutes later, when she walked onto the Carnegie Hall stage, 2,800 fans were applauding. But nobody knew that the letter Billie carried in her pocket would break her down in the middle of the performance. And the real reason for the tears shed on stage that night remained a secret for 70 years, until the letter resurfaced at an auction house in 2018. Before you continue watching this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Because what comes next in Billie Holiday's Carnegie Hall story is one of music history's most heartbreaking secrets, and you won't want to miss it. March 24, 1948, New Orleans. In a small boarding house room in the French Quarter, a woman was trembling as she wrote a letter. Sadie Fagan, Billie Holiday's mother, pressed her pen to the paper, and the ink spread in a droplet because her hand was shaking uncontrollably. The first lines of the letter that would emerge years later read, "Billie, I never wanted to tell you this, but the time has come. Everything you know about your father is a lie." As Sadie wrote the letter, she paced around the room, occasionally looking out the window at people passing by. She acted paranoid, as if someone was watching her, because the words she was writing weren't just a secret, they were a confession. And this confession would cause Billie to question her entire life. When the letter was completed, it was 3 pages long. Sadie sealed the envelope and wrote only Lady Day on it. She didn't write any address because she knew Billie was performing at Carnegie Hall. The letter had to be sent there. But why that night exactly? Why at the peak of her career? Sadie's reasons were complex, and those reasons traced back to Billie's childhood. The relationship between Sadie Fagan and Billie Holiday had never been a normal mother-daughter relationship. When Billie was just 15, Sadie had pushed her into a music career to make money, to support the family, and Billie succeeded. Lady Day became the rising star of the jazz world in the late 1930s, and every dime she earned went into Sadie's hands. But this flow of money didn't satisfy Sadie. She always wanted more. She clashed with Billie's managers, fought with record companies, and tried to control her daughter. In 1945, Billie finally said no to Sadie. She set boundaries about money, wanted to live her own life, and Sadie never forgave this rejection. Their relationship grew tense, cold, and eventually reached a breaking point. In early 1948, Sadie moved to New Orleans and cut off communication with Billie. But the anger and resentment growing inside her pushed her to make a move, to reveal the truth Billie didn't know. The letter was mailed on March 25th and sent to New York, with an urgent stamp. During the 2-day journey, that envelope was lined up with thousands of other letters, loaded onto trucks, transported on trains, and finally reached the heart of Manhattan. On the morning of March 27th, when it was delivered to Carnegie Hall's back door, the staff member saw the Lady Day writing on the envelope and decided to take it to Billie Holiday's dressing room. But the staff member didn't know the contents of the letter. Nobody knew. And when Billie Holiday opened that envelope, she couldn't even imagine that one of the happiest moments of her life would turn into the most painful. The afternoon of March 27, 1948, Carnegie Hall's backstage was alive. Musicians were tuning their instruments, the technical crew was doing final checks, and Billie Holiday's team was working to make sure everything was perfect. This wasn't just a concert, it was a night that could be the turning point of Billie's career. Carnegie Hall was considered the cathedral of classical music, and for a jazz vocalist, performing here meant respectability and prestige. Billie's manager, Joe Glazer, was walking around backstage, giving everyone instructions. The press was there: Downbeat magazine, Metronome, the New York Times Critic. Each would scrutinize Billie's performance, and Billie in her dressing room was aware of this pressure. But she was ready. She'd been preparing for this moment for years. Makeup was being applied, a gardenia flower was being pinned in her hair, and the stage outfit, that magnificent white satin dress, was hanging ready. Everything was going according to plan, until that envelope arrived. At 6:45, 1 hour and 15 minutes before the concert started, the staff member knocked on the door. Billie's makeup artist opened the door, and the staff member held out the envelope. "Urgent for Miss Holiday," he said. The makeup artist gave the envelope to Billie. When Billie took the envelope in her hand, the first thing she noticed was there was no sender's name on it. Just Lady Day was written, Billie's stage name. Who had sent this letter? Billie slowly opened the envelope and pulled out 3 pages. It took 1 second to recognize the handwriting. It was her mother, Sadie's. But why was she sending a letter? They hadn't spoken for months. When Billie read the first line, the world spun. "Everything you know about your father is a lie." Billie's breath caught. Her father, Clarence Holiday, the guitarist musician, the man who died in 1937. What lie? Billie continued reading, and with each line the shock wave grew. In the letter, Sadie explained who Billie's father really was, how he died, and most importantly, that he wanted to see Billie before he died, but Sadie had prevented it. When Clarence Holiday was dying, he wanted to say goodbye to his daughter in his hospital bed, but Sadie hadn't told Billie. "I did it to protect you," the letter said. "But now I understand that was my biggest mistake." Billie Holiday's hands trembled. The letter fell from her hand and scattered to the floor. The makeup artist immediately rushed over. "Billie, what happened?" But Billie couldn't answer. Her eyes were staring into space, and thousands of memories were colliding in her mind. The last day she saw her father. In the winter months of 1937, Clarence Holiday had fallen ill with pneumonia, and Billie wanted to see him. But Sadie had said, "Not now, you'll see him after he gets better." But Clarence didn't get better. He died, and Billie never got to say goodbye. Now, 11 years later, she was learning that her father had wanted to see her, but her mother hadn't allowed it. Betrayal, lies, lies. Everything crashed down on Billie at once. And right then, the door knocked again. Stage manager John Hammond raised his voice. "5 minutes, Miss Holiday. You need to be ready." Billie tried to pull herself together. She took a deep breath. She stood up. The makeup artist quickly did the final touches, but Billie's eyes were still red. "Are you okay?" the makeup artist asked. Billie nodded, but she wasn't okay. She was shattered inside. But Carnegie Hall was waiting for her. 2,800 people had bought tickets. The press was there. This concert couldn't be canceled. Billie folded the letter and put it in her dress pocket, as if it would keep her close to her father, and she walked toward the stage. The Carnegie Hall stage was magnificent. Red velvet curtains, gleaming wooden floors, and a giant crystal chandelier hanging in the middle of the hall. At 8 o'clock the lights dimmed, and the stage manager came to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Day, Billie Holiday." Applause erupted. 2,800 people stood up, and when Billie walked on stage, the spotlight illuminated her. That magnificent white satin dress reflected the lights. The gardenia flower in her hair sparkled. Billie approached the microphone, smiled, and began singing her first song, "Them Their Eyes." Her voice had that familiar vibrato. Control was perfect, and the fans were mesmerized. The first 3 songs went smoothly. Fine and Mellow, Crazy He Calls Me, and God Bless the Child. Each presented with magnificent performances. Critics were taking notes. the press was taking photos, and Billie was acting like everything was normal. But inside, a storm was raging. The letter in her pocket felt heavier with every note, and then came that moment. The fourth song was going to be Strange Fruit, Billie's most powerful, most political, and most emotional song. This song about racism, lynching, and America's darkest was always difficult for Billie because it wasn't just a performance, it was a testimony. But that night, Strange Fruit would take on another meaning. When Billie began the song, her voice was more fragile than ever. Southern trees bear a strange fruit. As the words fell from her lips, her father Clarence's face appeared in her mind, a man dying from pneumonia in a hospital bed, wanting to see his daughter. And Billie wasn't there, because her mother hadn't allowed it. The song continued, blood on the leaves, and blood at the root, and Billie's voice began to shake. Fans noticed, musicians noticed, but nobody could stop it, because Billie had to continue. Black bodies, swinging in the southern breeze, and right then, the first tear streamed from Billie's eyes. Under the spotlight, that tear sparkled, and everyone in the hall saw it. There was no applause, just silence, because everyone understood. This wasn't just a performance.
No.
This was a breakdown. When the song ended, Billie put down the microphone and walked toward the edge of the stage. She couldn't breathe. Her chest was tight. A panic attack was coming. The musicians looked at each other in confusion. What would they do? The concert had to continue. But Billie Holiday was at the breaking point. Piano player Bobby Tucker quickly started playing something, an instrumental break, to buy Billie time to breathe. And in those few minutes, Billie ran backstage. When she entered the dressing room, she vomited. Her hands were shaking, her eyes were blurred, and her heart was beating wildly. The makeup artist came running. Billie, what's happening? Billie pulled the letter from her pocket and handed it to the makeup artist. Read it. Just read it. The makeup artist quickly scanned through the letter, and her face fell. Oh, Billie, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. But sorry wasn't enough. The damage was done, and the concert wasn't over yet. 10 minutes later, Billie Holiday walked back on stage. But she was no longer the same. Billie, her eyes were red, her makeup had been repaired, but the pain on her face couldn't be hidden. The fans applauded, teen supportive applause, consoling applause. Billie came to the microphone and spoke for the first time that night. I'm sorry. Sometimes the past catches us at unexpected moments. Her voice was broken but determined, and she began the next song, Gloomy Sunday. This song was known as the suicide song because the lyrics were so bleak that some people were said to have committed suicide after listening to it. Billie rarely sang this song because the emotional burden was hard to carry, but that night, Gloomy Sunday was the perfect choice. Because what Billie was feeling was exactly that, loss, regret, and an irreversible end. Gloomy is Sunday, with shadows I spend it all. When the song began, the hall froze. Billie's voice, with that broken and painful sound, was singing every word like a confession. And the fans realized that Billie wasn't the only one crying. Hundreds of people in the hall were shedding tears, because Billie's pain was so real that it had spread to everyone. When the song ended, applause erupted, but this time it was different. This was respectful applause, empathetic applause, and Billie Holiday, at that moment, realized she had transformed fragility into strength. The letter in her pocket was still there. Her father's loss still hurt, but she was no longer alone, because those 2,800 people in that hall were crying with her. The concert continued. I'll be seeing you, the man I love, and as the final song, I cover the waterfront. Each song was like a farewell. Goodbye to her father, goodbye to the relationship with her mother, goodbye to an innocent past. And Billie Holiday was healing a little more with each note, because music had always been her therapy. When the concert ended, it was 10:30. As Billie left the stage, The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Critics were amazed. The press had taken their photos, and when Billie Holiday returned to her dressing room, the first thing she did was read that letter again. Sadie Fagan's letter was 3 pages long, and every line was a bomb. The first page was about Clarence Holiday's death. Sadie had written, "When your father got sick in 1937, I decided to keep you away from him because I didn't want you to be upset. But when he was dying, he wanted to talk to you. They called from the hospital. They said bring his daughter. But I didn't go. I didn't take you either. Because I thought if you saw him in that condition, you'd be traumatized. But now I understand that the real trauma was not being able to say goodbye." This confession had shattered Billie because for years she'd tried to come to terms with her father's death and had always thought, "I wish I could have seen him one last time." Now she was learning that she actually could have, if her mother had allowed it. The second page was even darker. Sadie confessed how she controlled Billie's money, how she lied to managers, and how much she stole from Billie's earnings. "I exploited you," it said. "I acted like I needed every penny, but the truth is, I just wanted control, because you were my only success, and I was afraid of losing you." The third page contained the most painful part. Sadie was revealing things she'd never told about Billie's childhood. The sexual abuse incident Billie experienced when she was 10 years old, how Sadie had ignored it and blamed Billie. "I couldn't protect you," Sadie wrote, "and I'll never forgive myself for it. But at least now I want you to know, keeping you away from your father was the biggest sin a mother could commit, and I committed that sin." The letter ended like this: "I don't expect you to forgive me, Billie. I just want you to know the truth. And I want you to know that despite all my mistakes, I loved you, in my own broken way, but I loved you." Signature, Sadie. When Billie Holiday finished reading that letter, she felt very complex emotions: anger, pain, regret, even a bit of relief, because she finally knew the truth. For years she couldn't understand why her relationship with her mother was so difficult. Now she understood. Sadie had transferred her own traumas onto Billie, and Billie had paid the price for a lifetime. The next day, March 28, 1948, newspapers carried the Carnegie Hall concert on their front pages. The New York Times wrote, "Billie Holiday's emotional Carnegie Hall performance, Lady Day delivers historic concert through tears." Downbeat magazine, "Billie Holiday's most powerful performance, fragility and strength together." Metronome, "Lady Day opens her heart at Carnegie Hall." Critics praised the performance, but nobody asked, why did she cry? What happened backstage? Billie Holiday didn't hold any press conferences. She refused interview requests, and she didn't tell anyone about the letter, because this was too personal. This reckoning between her and her mother wasn't the public's business, but close friends noticed. Piano player Bobby Tucker would say years later in an interview, after the Carnegie Hall concert, Billie changed. She became more introverted. She stopped talking about her mother, and she didn't want to hear her father's name. Something had happened, but she never told us exactly what. The relationship between Sadie Fagan and Billie Holiday never recovered after that letter. 2 months later, in May 1948, Billie spoke with her mother one more time, on the phone, brief and cold. "I got your letter," Billie said, "and I have nothing more to say to you." Sadie apologized through tears, but Billie hung up the phone, and she never had another serious conversation with her mother again. When Sadie Fagan died in 1945, Billie went to the funeral but didn't cry. Friends were surprised. How was it possible not to shed tears at your mother's funeral? But for Billie, her relationship with Sadie had already died. On that Carnegie Hall night in 1948, with that letter, in 2018, an extraordinary discovery was made at Sotheby's auction house. In a collection of items belonging to Billie Holiday that were going up for sale, researchers found a yellowed envelope. On the envelope was written, Carnegie Hall, March 27, 1948, and inside was a 3-page handwritten letter. When auction specialists examined the letter, they determined it had been written from Sadie Fagan to Billie Holiday. Handwriting analysis, ink dating, and the age of the paper everything pointed to 1940. And the content, it was shocking. The auction house consulted Billie Holiday experts before revealing the letter to the public. Music historian Dr. Robert O'Meally from Columbia University examined the letter and said, "This document explains why Billie Holiday cried at her Carnegie Hall concert. A question unanswered for 70 years has finally found its answer." The letter went to auction in April 28. The starting price was $10,000, but a bidding war began. Billie Holiday fans, music historians, and collectors competed. Final bid $47,000. The person who purchased the letter chose to remain anonymous, but allowed the letter's contents to be shared with the public. The media went crazy. Rolling Stone magazine, the real reason for Billie Holiday's Carnegie Hall tears revealed after 70 years. NPR did a special program, Lady Day's Lost Letter, and Billie Holiday fans finally understood the tears shed at Carnegie Hall that night weren't just a performance. They were the physical manifestation of a heartbreak, a moment of betrayal, and the pain of not being able to say goodbye to a father. Sadie Fagan's letter revealed one of the darkest secrets of Billie Holiday's life: the toxic relationship with her mother, the trauma of not being able to say goodbye to her father, and how all of this was reflected in her stage performance. And this discovery required a reinterpretation of Billie Holiday's art. Because now we knew, in each of her songs there was pain, in each note there was loss, in each performance there was a confession. Sadie Fagan's own story was also tragic. Born in 1896, Sadie had grown up in rural Virginia, became pregnant at a very young age, and gave birth to Billie at 16. The father, Clarence Holiday, had fled from responsibilities, and Sadie had struggled as a single mother. As a Black woman in early 1900s America, she had to do everything to survive. Sometimes cleaning jobs, sometimes illegal work, sometimes choices that pushed moral boundaries to survive. And all of this had affected Sadie's mental health. Trauma, poverty, and the constant struggle to survive made Sadie a harsh, controlling, and sometimes manipulative mother. Her love for Billie was real, but this love manifested in unhealthy ways. Sadie wanted to protect Billie, but at the same time wanted to control her, be dependent on her, and benefit from her success. These contradictions poisoned the mother-daughter relationship. The letter in 1948 was a kind of confession and regret moment for Sadie. Perhaps she was feeling old, perhaps her conscience was bothering her, or maybe as retaliation against Billie cutting her off financially, she decided to reveal the truth that would hurt her daughter the most. According to psychologists, Sadie's behavior showed examples of toxic motherhood and intergenerational trauma transmission. Sadie had unconsciously transferred the pain she experienced to her daughter, and Billie carried this burden throughout her life. The Carnegie Hall letter was the climax of this toxic cycle. A mother, by telling her daughter the most painful truth at her happiest moment, was trying to control one last time. Clarence Holiday was a ghost figure in Billie's life. He was a guitarist and banjo player who had played with the Fletcher Henderson Orchestra in the 1920s and was a recognized name in the jazz world. But as a father, he was absent. He rarely saw Billie, provided no financial support, and never established a real father-daughter relationship. As a child, Billie had longed for her father. She dreamed of seeing him, talking to him, maybe making music together. But Clarence was always distant, on tour, in another city, in another life, until he fell ill with pneumonia in 1937. While touring in Dallas, Texas, Clarence suddenly became ill and was hospitalized. His condition rapidly deteriorated, and doctors told him to call his family. Clarence said he wanted to see his daughter. The hospital called Sadie, but Sadie didn't go, and she didn't take Billie either. For years, Billie Holiday didn't know about her father's final moments. All she knew was that Clarence had died, and she hadn't been able to say goodbye. This loss created a deep void in Billie's life. In her songs, the longing for a father figure, the search for male approval, and the fear of abandonment were often reflected. Psychologists say that Billie's toxic male relationships throughout her life, Jimmy Monroe, John Levy, Louis McKay, were reflections of trying to find the connection she couldn't establish with her father. Billie searched for a father figure throughout her life, and every time she encountered men who disappointed her, exploited her, or abused her. In the 1948 Carnegie Hall letter, Sadie's revelation of Clarence's final wish was devastating for Billie because she learned she could have said goodbye to her father, but her mother didn't allow it. This knowledge increased Billie's anger toward both Sadie and herself. "I wish I had known," she thought. "I wish I could have gone there." In the months after the Carnegie Hall concert, Billie Holiday's recordings gained remarkable emotional depth. The recordings she made for Decca Records in the second half of 1948, "You're My Thrill," "Crazy He Calls Me," "My Man," all carried themes of loss, regret, and confession. Music critics noticed the change in Billie's voice. The vibrato was less powerful, but the emotional weight was heavier, as if each song was a confession, and in a way, it was. After that letter at Carnegie Hall, Billie began using her music as a therapy tool. She was singing what she couldn't say. She was processing through stage performances the issues she couldn't resolve with her mother, and listeners felt this authenticity. The 1949 recording of Gloomy Sunday is considered one of Billie's darkest recordings. Witnesses said that when she sang the song, she imagined her father's deathbed. Every note was like a farewell, and listeners felt this deep sorrow. Musicologist Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin, when analyzing Billie Holiday's post-Carnegie Hall period, wrote 1948 was a breaking point for Billie. The Carnegie Hall concert wasn't just a career peak, it was an emotional reckoning, and that reckoning transformed Billie's music. She was no longer just an artist performing. She had become a storyteller, sharing her pain, voicing her trauma, and offering her emotional reality to listeners. This transformation explains why Billie Holiday's late period recordings in the 1950s were so powerful. When the Lady in Satin album was recorded in 1958, critics criticized the fragility in her voice, but fans found reality in that fragility. Because Billie Holiday wasn't hiding anymore, she was showing every wound in every broken note. The 1948 Carnegie Hall concert was a turning point in Billie Holiday's life, but it also had special meaning for her fans. Many of the 2,800 people who were in the hall that night talked about that concert for the rest of their lives. Because they didn't just listen to music, they witnessed a human heart breaking, and that was an unforgettable experience. Janet Morrison, a Billie Holiday fan in the 1970s, remembered being there that night. "I was 19 and I was in a balcony seat at Carnegie Hall. I was going to see Billie live for the first time and I was so excited. But when she sang Strange Fruits and started crying, everyone went silent. I felt like time had stopped. And at that moment I understood that this is the true power of art, a person sharing their soul in a naked way." This testimony explains why the Carnegie Hall concert became legendary. Because that night, Billie Holiday didn't just sing, she opened herself, and this openness made her immortal. Today, Carnegie Hall still commemorates that night. In 2018, after the letter auction, Carnegie Hall organized a special memorial event. Billie Holiday's recorded Carnegie Hall performances were played. Music historians analyzed that night, and fans came together. Carnegie Hall archive director Gino Francesconi, speaking at the event, said that night in 1948 was one of the most emotional moments in Carnegie Hall history. Billie Holiday didn't just give a concert here. She made a confession, and that confession was carved into music history. In Carnegie Hall's archives, recordings from that night are still preserved. The audio quality isn't perfect because 1948 technology was limited, but the emotional power is still there. The tremor in Billie's voice, the silence after Strange Fruit, the applause and those tears all recorded. And listeners, even 70 years later, can still feel that night. From a modern psychological perspective, Billie Holiday's Carnegie Hall experience is a classic example of a trauma trigger. Psychologist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in his work on trauma, explains how traumatic memories can resurface unexpectedly. For Billie, that letter was exactly that nuance, an unexpected trigger. Emotions forced for years, unresolved regrets, and unspoken words suddenly surfaced. And the fact that this happened in a stage setting intensified the situation even more, because Billie had to cope with both her internal trauma and external performance pressure. Psychologists call this emotional splitting, a person facing two different realities at the same time. Billie's breakdown while singing Strange Fruit was the physical manifestation of this splitting. She could no longer separate, was it Billie the artist on stage, or Billie the suffering human? According to Dr. van der Kolk's theory, trauma victims must create a narrative to process trauma. For Billie Holiday, this narrative was music. Singing Strange Fruit at Carnegie Hall was a way to process her father's loss. Crying was a mechanism to release those suppressed emotions, and the post-concert recordings were an effort to transform that trauma into artistic form. From this perspective, Billie Holiday's entire late career was a process of working through the trauma created by the Carnegie Hall letter. Every song was a therapy session. Every performance was a healing step, and listeners were witnessing this process. Today, trauma-informed therapy specialists use Billie Holiday's story as an example because she showed the power of transforming trauma through art. Instead of suppressing pain, she transformed it into music. And this transformation was healing for both herself and her listeners. Sadie Fagan's decision to send that letter is ethically problematic. Why would a mother reveal the most painful truth at her daughter's most important career moment? This question has been debated for years. Some think Sadie's timing was deliberate sabotage. Maybe she couldn't digest Billie's success. Maybe she couldn't tolerate her daughter becoming independent from her. Or maybe she wanted to make sure Billie was suffering even at her happiest moment. This interpretation defines Sadie as a narcissistic mother. But there's another perspective. Maybe Sadie knew Billie was at the peak of her career and thought that if her daughter was strong and successful, she could handle this truth. Maybe the letter was sent not for destruction but for liberation. Because Sadie wrote, "Now I want you to know the truth." This interpretation shows more empathy towards Sadie. Maybe her conscience was bothering her and she wanted to come clean before dying. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Sadie Fagan was a complex person, a mother who both loved and harmed. Sending the letter could have been both a confession and a weapon. What was the result for Billie Holiday? In the short term, it was pain and trauma. But in the long term, maybe it was liberation. Because knowing the truth gave Billie the opportunity to reevaluate her relationship with her father. She no longer thought, "Why didn't he love me?" Instead, she knew the truth. He wanted to see me but wasn't allowed. And this knowledge, though painful, contained less guilt. Forgiving Clarence became easier because now she knew her father hadn't abandoned her. He just hadn't been able to see her. After the 1948 Carnegie Hall letter, Billie and Sadie's relationship never recovered. Phone conversations were rare and cold. Billie refused to meet with her mother face to face, and Sadie continued living alone in New Orleans. Friends said Sadie was full of regret, cried often, and missed talking to Billie. But Billie didn't forgive, because some wounds are too deep. Sadie Fagan died in 1945 from cirrhosis and heart failure. Billie Holiday went to her mother's funeral but appeared emotionless. Close friend Memory Midget remembered at the funeral, Billie was like stone. She didn't cry, didn't speak. She just looked at the casket and then left, as if she felt nothing there. But the reality was different. Billie was trying to process the complexity of her relationship with her mother. Anger, pain, love, hate, everything was intertwined. And not crying at the funeral didn't mean she felt none of it. It just meant she felt all of it at the same time. After Sadie's death, the mother theme began appearing more frequently in Billie's music. God Bless the Child became especially meaningful. The lyrics, Mama may have, Papa may have, but God bless the child that's got his own, telling the importance of standing on your own feet for those who can't rely on mother and father. And when Billie sang this song, it was no longer just a general message. It was her own story, her own survival manifesto. Today, from the perspective of the 2020s, Billie Holiday's Carnegie Hall letter story takes on new meaning. In light of the Me Too movement and trauma awareness, Billie's experience has become a symbol of the silent scream of trauma victims. Because when Billie cried on stage that night, nobody knew the real reason. Everyone thought it was performance. But the reality was deeper, and this is many people's experience today. They hide their pain because revealing it seems too costly. Feminists use Billie Holiday's story as an example of how the patriarchal system silences women. Sadie Fagan exploited her daughter to survive in a male-dominated society. Clarence Holiday fled without taking responsibility, and Billie Holiday paid the price for all of it. But she also resisted. She kept singing. She told her story in every note of her voice, and this resistance is inspiring today. In 2019, after the Carnegie Hall letter emerged, a hashtag started on Twitter, We Believe Billie. Thousands of people shared their own trauma stories and celebrated Billie Holiday's courage. Because Billie, instead of hiding her trauma, transformed it into music. And this transformation showed the way to others. Music therapist Dr. Sherry Robb said she uses Billie Holiday's story as an example for her patients. I tell Billie this, your pain doesn't define you, but what you do with your pain shapes your identity. Billie Holiday transformed her pain into music, and this is one of the most powerful forms of healing. Billie Holiday returned to Carnegie Hall one more time. In 1956, 8 years later, but this time it was a different Billie. Her voice had changed, the effects of drug and alcohol use had created damage in her body, but the emotional depth was more powerful than ever. The 1956 concert took place in front of a smaller crowd, but those who were there witnessed an unforgettable performance. When Billie came on stage, the first thing she said was, I was here 8 years ago, and that night, I cried. I might cry today too, but this time, I'll cry because I'm alive. The crowd applauded, and Billie began singing, I'll Be Seeing You, a farewell song. But this time, the farewell was to the past. Carnegie Hall, her mother Sadie, her father Clarence, goodbye to all of them. And as Billie Holiday sang that song, she finally seemed at peace. When she died in 1959, there was a note in Billie Holiday's will. I want the recording of my 1948 Carnegie Hall concert not to be sold at auction. This belongs to me. This wish was honored. The recording remained in Billie's estate and today is preserved in a special collection in Carnegie Hall's archives. For those who want to listen, special permission is required because that recording isn't just a performance, It's the naked state of a human soul. Carnegie Hall, March 27, 1948. The tears shed that night remained a mystery for 70 years. But when the truth emerged, everyone understood. Billie Holiday wasn't just singing, she was living her life. In every note, in every tear, in every broken voice, there was a story. The unresolved conflict with her mother, the pain of not being able to say goodbye to her father, and despite all of this, the struggle to survive. What does this story tell us today? That pain is inevitable, but how we process that pain defines us. Billie Holiday transformed her pain into music, and this transformation made her immortal. Because now, when we listen to her songs, we don't just hear music, we hear a human heart beating. We hear a woman's struggle to survive, and we hear those 1948 Carnegie Hall tears, no longer as a mystery, but as a testimony. Billie Holiday's legacy lives not just in music, it lives in the courage to transform trauma, in the power to tell the truth, and in the determination to never be silenced. That letter was the last pain Sadie gave to her daughter, but Billie took that pain and transformed it into art, and that is the greatest victory. Because the Billie Holiday who cried at Carnegie Hall that night wasn't defeated, she survived, and her voice echoes forever.